Rob, how do you make that your day to day? How does everyone joining us today aspire to have such words described of us as you think about your career? As you know, because it sounds very intentional. This is a very intentional journey for you. Can you walk us through your journey in your career, whatever facet you want to begin with? But I'm deeply intrigued by this consciousness, this intentionality to be a servant leader and to be so aware of your place and how you impact lives.
Yeah, thank you. And hello, everybody. So I mentioned it briefly in that very long piece where people were talking about me too long and I was cringing. But I did set out at first to be an editorial cartoonist. That's the only thing I ever wanted to be. But it is, all cartooning is very much an isolated sort of experience. And so I do want to call out Alice Bonner again, because Alice was an executive at Gannett who I knew through my parents and who reached out on my way to my very first job out in this outpost in Danville, Illinois. And she was very clear that we just weren't in a position in newspaper newsrooms in 1985 or 86 to set up as isolated folks. You know, we needed one another. And shortly after I got to Danville, I met my best friend in life, a guy named Alvin Reed, who was already there as a business writer. And to give you a sense of what it was like being in that environment, I didn't pay very close attention to the job description. They said I could be an editorial cartoonist, but they also wanted me to be a general assignment reporter and a graphic artist. So I had like 3 jobs. But it was also very clear to me that in the well-intentioned efforts to bring in diverse people into the newsroom, a place like Danville wasn't large enough to have the kind of training and infrastructure so that folks in their entry-level jobs would get the kind of editing or focus to get better at what they were doing. So Alvin and I used to race through our stories and then have some of the, and again, I'd only been working there for a few weeks, but have some of the other younger reporters send us their stories so that we could give them a line edit before those stories went to the copy desk. You know, we were just conditioned very early on to be looking out for one another. And that just felt to me like what Alice Bonner was talking about. And you know, when you make that a point, people kind of know about it, right? And it's just something that I ended up taking with me every day. You know, I think a lot of us come into some of these jobs with a bit of you know, imposter complex. How did I get into this role? And does anybody really want me in this role? And can I really do this job? But you know, my parents have also really been amazing mentors. And the point here was just, no, you do belong. And not only do you belong, you have greater responsibility than just your day job or day jobs. So I didn't really have much of a choice. I mean, I think from the time I got going, I could see, you know, a struggling young sports writer who only had enough money to get an apartment and not enough to buy a car. Like, you know, got to help that person. Otherwise, that person's never going to get to the next opportunity. So yeah, I think from day one, it was just part of the gig. And one of the things I do want to say aloud is that for some of us, this conversation about having an equal opportunity or being treated fairly is something that we feel. For some, it's something people recognize as, you know, a good thing, and they recognize it as, you know, things to an entity to be trained on and to learn more about. But some of us feel it every day. And like I said in that video, you know, that's actually the full-time job. That's a job you can't walk away from. Like, you know, that's the job. I'm doing that job when I'm on the streets with my kids, when I'm, you know, in the grocery store, you know, and, you know, when I'm out there in the world representing and giving people the sense that we belong is a full-time gig. And the other thing I can take vacation from, but I will never be able to take a vacation from this responsibility.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that. So in the video as well, and then of course this is true of you every day, you're sitting in rooms, you're sitting in strategy meetings, you are sitting in editorial meetings, you're looking at content. Walk us through a day in the life of Rob at ESPN. What does your day-to-day look like?
I actually asked for this job as editor at large because what I wanted to be able to do is touch everything. And so that does literally define what my day is like. You know, today I gave notes on a film. Today I was in a story planning meeting. I was just in a high level, I guess, editorial conversation about the degree to which Adidas's abandonment of Ye is a sports story or not, or sports business story or not. Um, so I do find myself getting involved in all forms of content all day long. I do spend a lot of time trying to consume as much as possible because we produce and we produce and we produce. And sometimes we're learning in real time lessons that we can take forward to be better. And you know, I'm fortunate enough to be brought in on content that is years in the making, so that you know, that kind of time to think is applied to some of the more important content initiatives we have. But I just have full days, you know. I have you know, I have a half an hour socked away every day for something that went wrong. You know, you gotta have that SGW, something gone wrong, half hour, you know. And I do have longer range responsibilities. I oversee the ESPYs and I oversee our connection to the Sloan Sports Media Analytics Conference and some of those bigger initiatives. But there's some days where I wake up and I'm not really sure what my day is going to be like. I might have 3 or 4 things, you know, solidly on the agenda that should take a few hours, and the rest of it is as open and diverse as the content we create from one end of the operation to the next.
That's amazing. So that's what we call adaptive leadership, right? Adaptive leadership is that ability to, there are not fixed solutions to things, right? It's not technical fix. There's technical skills, and then there's adaptive leadership, which is very much a part of what you're describing, right? You're coming in, and I love that something could go wrong meetings. I think we should run ours that way at Daymaker, so we can use that strategy. But I love that, and I also love the balcony moments to reflect and to step aside and to think through. So I'm so glad you kind of touched on this little piece that's going on currently right now with Adidas, and so kind of leads me to this next question. And you don't, doesn't have to be about that, but it kind of touches on this interesting dance we find ourselves in, right? So social justice, societal issues, this is one of them. Sports versus non-sports, knowing that ESPN, when I think about ESPN, I think sports, right? That's where I go for most of my sports. But I also look at the advertising content. I look at what you're selecting in terms of how it's, you know, I can pick a lot from what's going on there, right? So with that in mind, what is ESPN's point of view in covering social justice and especially societal issues like the one you got pulled in about Adidas? What is their point of view in that?
Well, the first thing I would say is I didn't get pulled in, I pulled myself in because I thought it was a fascinating topic that we should at least discuss when we think about what we cover. Without a specific goal of saying we need to cover this story, it's really, how can we think about this sort of thing? Look, the reality is when we were actually covering the racial reckoning, that is an extreme manifestation of the conversation around social justice. And it required very specific thinking. It required us to be open and honest with one another internally about the emotional fire that was taking place. But we also recognize that our job is to cover American history, because sports is a big part of American history. And, you know, we certainly understand that we are covering a generation of athlete who recognizes what power can look like and recognizes the responsibility to be in some of these really important discussions to move things forward. You know, if Patrick Mahomes and the NFL players hadn't done what they did, not sure that the NFL would have moved as quickly, or Roger Goodell would have moved as quickly to try to join them in creating a better environment. You know, we learned a lot from college students and the way they showed up on campus and showed up for one another. and look, realistically, people, you're right. People think about ESPN, they think about sports, but we actually do a lot of audience insight work. And we do know that, more than 70% of people familiar with the ESPN brand would expect ESPN to cover racial injustice when and if it showed its ugly head. Sure, some people, some subsets of folks want more of it than others, but in general, our audience recognizes that we're doing our job when we step into these places. And these places are, it goes beyond sort of racial unrest. I mean, you think about equal pay, or you think about athletes who are right now raising their hands to make sure that everyone has access to being able to vote. If you think about some of the ways in which the LGBTQIA plus community has been challenged and threatened, the way in which violence sort of has cropped up against Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders. Even if you think about the anti-Semitism that you saw in Los Angeles as a result of some of the most recent Ye antics. These are things that are they happen more frequently than ever before, and the people we cover lean into them more than ever before. And I always say, I wish there were an ESPN in 1966 when Cassius Clay threw his gold medal into the Ohio River. We'd have covered it. If Jackie Robinson was breaking the color barrier, I like to think that ESPN was covering it, because these were moments that actually redefined a lot more than just one person's story. That's, again, part of American history. But I think, it's also important to recognize, and in order to do that well, we have had to rely on one another. We have had to open up our hearts to inclusive conversations, some of which have nothing to do with the creation of content and everything to do with our community, our sense of community at ESPN, our sense of responsibility to one another, our ability to make sure that people can come in and be their whole selves while they're doing their work. Because that's how you get to excellence in covering topics that are either complex or they're charged. I always say this, like when we did The Last Dance, everybody loved us every night we did The Last Dance, right?
Yeah, I did.
Very rarely do you find in the coverage of news an opportunity to do something where everybody's going to love you. That's not necessarily the goal. The goal is to be factual. The goal is to make our audiences feel seen, feel smarter. And we do that as a subset of all we do around who won, who lost, who's getting traded where, all of that fun stuff. It's still a piece of our responsibility, and if you have an owner who is using racist and sexist language over the course of 17 years, we report that, and we report it in a way that is very thoughtful, very careful, very fact-based, and that's part of the work too. But I would suggest that sports is a piece of society, a huge piece of society, and so this will always be part of our responsibility.
Yeah, it is a huge platform when you really think about, prior to getting on the call, we were talking about kind of the whole, and you think about spaces where people interact and are able to create commonality, common ground around a love of a sport or an individual or talent, right? I think it gives you a very powerful platform, and I am honored that ESPN treats it with the honor and the gravity that it deserves to be able to bring these stories forward, right? And to be able to understand that you are reporting on history. I really loved your take on that, because sports is history. Every time you want to break the ice with anyone, it's really easy to begin with sports, right? Did you see the game last night? Did you see the Bears last night? Did you, right? So that always breaks the ice, and then you can move on to whatever the next topic is. So I love that lens that you all bring into this and into the room, and how you're thinking about these issues. I can also imagine kind of like the proverbial risk of what this means, right? Because nowadays people are so easily offended, right? I feel like we're so polarized at times that I can only imagine the nature of what is risk, what is not risk, and how it's, but I love that you also answered it from a place of commitment to journalistic excellence in how you report and what you do. So thank you for that. And I think I'm seeing it portrayed at the highest level with ESPN as I now kind of get a lens into how you all reflect on what you present to us as audiences. So that kind of leads me to this other question as I'm thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong. I think you're getting into your 35th year of storytelling, right? Is it still 35 years of?
It might be more than that by now.
Okay, so more than 35 years of storytelling. I mean, you only started when you were 12, which is great, right? So thinking of what you just talked about, storytelling, and thinking about those diverse stories, and thinking about who helps curate those diverse stories, because I think I had that. What do you think in terms of how ESPN is serving those diverse audiences and the different ways that you're breaking ground in doing that?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that question, because I think if you spend time with all of ESPN, which I try to do, you get a pretty good glimpse of things we're doing. I mean, if you start from the standpoint of what we're doing in the social space, for example, we have young, diverse talent, doing shows in advance of College Game Day or in advance of of NBA games, separate shows that are very specific to some social digital platforms. We have a sports betting show that is on Snapchat. The way in which this content is presented is very much directed towards the way in which younger diverse people are actually coming to various platforms. So the growth of ESPN and SportsCenter on TikTok is explosive, but it's targeted. And then, you look over to things like what we're doing on ESPN Plus, where some of the choices and some of the stories that we've told, or some of the collections we put together in ESPN Plus, have actually enabled audiences to find themselves. So whether that's ESPN Más, which is just a location of Spanish language and really sort of Latinx focused content, to documentaries we've done on the Southern University Fabulous Dancing Dolls, which expands the definition of what sports is, but is really inclusive of that tradition at the HBCU and what these young women are striving to do. I think that's fascinating. I think, our technology group leaned in really hard last year to make sure that we were, where we could, treating women's sports equally. And in fact, we now have, a WNBA fantasy game and the women's tournament challenge, which goes up against the men's tournament challenge during the NCAA tournament, had a record sign up and record year. If you wanted to follow a women's basketball player or softball player in terms of their stats, just like you could a man, now you can. And we just realized this was an opportunity to just show that we actually lean into women's sports in a way that is commensurate with the way we lean into men's sports. And I think you see us do things, actually very intentional things with even marketing messages. We've got a marketing message out right now that's very much oriented towards fans and fandom. And if you watch that piece, you can see that we were really, really hard to represent all fans in a marketing spot, right? So it's not just a sort of a targeted show element. It's actually, what we say it's a brand spot. This is who we celebrate the fan. And the work on the people that you see in that was really, really intentional. So very proud of the team for that work. But I would say that we're pretty tireless, whether it's from a product perspective or whether it's a content perspective, in trying to make sure that audiences see themselves. I think people kind of expect that of ESPN. They expect to be included in the room. And I think that it requires, you said the word before, commitment. It requires a sense that all of these things are opportunities. When our team got together to imagine the National Hockey League coming back, they worked extra hard to make sure that the group of talent that speaks about hockey all season long is as diverse as any group ever to talk about hockey. And that was just absolute intention, because, you know, even working with the NHL, it's very, very clear that they too want to grow the game. And so, you know, our values were aligned in that space, and we tried to bear them out just by virtue of who we gave a stick mic to. So, you know, I think there are a lot of those. You know, there are a great many things we're taking shots on ESPN Plus in terms of content and storytelling that represent stories you might not expect us to tell. You know, we had a director, Kristen Lapis, do an amazing 3-part film on the 1996 U.S. Olympic women's basketball team, the team that really sort of set up the notion that there could be a successful pro league. It's a great film, you know, but if you were sitting around with a group of friends and you were saying, oh, you know what the next movie ESPN should do is, you probably wouldn't have come up with that. Or we have a short film, 30 for 30 short film about a guy named Louis Sockalexis, who's the first Native American to play Major League Baseball. And in fact, is one of the reasons why Cleveland changed its names to the Indians. And it's a 29-minute, beautiful, quiet, sad, wonderful film that, you know, we take pride in. And it's not The Last Dance, right? It's not The Captain with Derek Jeter. It's not, you know, Man in the Arena with Tom Brady, but it's a story that needs and deserves to be told. And, you know, like I said, pretty proud of our entire content team for the constant creativity and trying to identify these ways of serving sports fans.
Excellent. You know, that I love ESPN. I am the only female in the house surrounded by 4 men. Needless to say, all the 4 TVs are always on ESPN, one or the other, right? Because there's sports going on and the various fans. So I do appreciate it just from an audience perspective and the stories that are shared. And I can attest to seeing those different voices and things that I always go, oh my, I didn't know that, right? So one that really spoke to me was this baseball documentary of the recruiting and how that happened. I had no idea, right? So again, I learned something. I'm not a huge baseball fan, but I watched that short movie all the way through and learned so much about what people sacrificed to do that, and the various voices in which it was told was really powerful. So keep up the good work. So this leads me to the intrigue that I've been really curious to know. What was the genesis of the Inclusive Content Committee? Like, how did that come about? And is that kind of the byproduct of what I'm hearing and kind of the diverse content? Or let me let you speak to that. What was the genesis of that?
Yeah, so across the Disney company, there have been similar efforts to make sure that either in front of the camera or behind the camera, as projects are greenlit, there's a process through which the conversation around equal opportunity to participate is front and center. You know, so it took a couple of years for really me to get my head around how I could work at ESPN, because, you know, in the world of scripted television, you have pilot season. So you have plenty of time to sort of jump in and step in and, you know, check to make sure people are sort of doing what they can to make their efforts most inclusive. Or with films, you have, you know, anywhere from 2 to 5 years to get in on that process. But we're 24/7, 365, you know, nights, holidays, weekends. And so it became pretty clear that in order for us to do this, what we would need is a lot of people. And we would want that collection of people to be broadly represented across the company. We didn't want everybody to be lumped into the same content vertical. So we did 2 things. We asked the content chairs of all of our burgs to be automatic members. So that's 9 people, 9 categories of diversity. So families, military service, LGBTQIA plus, Black and African American, Latinx, Hispanic, you know, Asian Pacific Islander. I'm missing some categories. Our enabled group that looks at the disability community, you know. So we got the content chairs. So that was 9. And then we sort of did a roadshow around the company, and we asked people to apply, and we chose the last 6. So we started with a cohort of 15, and Yeah, we meet every Monday. In between Mondays are sort of open house days where we'll invite somebody who's working on a project to come present, or a couple of folks to come present to the group. But by and large, we are asked by our content colleagues to either vet pitches, to look at work that's coming down the pike, to look at work that showed up at the last second, but people just really think like they would really like our eyes on it. You know, we've seen everything from marketing spots to our corporate responsibility handbook covers to films to you know, developing news stories, feature stories. And the content comes in on a steady loop. It comes from our entire global content operation. So we're getting things from, you know, London and Brazil, and Mexico and Argentina. And the team works pretty hard. You know, I will say that we are going to expand. Going to expand from 15 to 25 as we get into year two of this. I think we're through 2 years. Yeah, we're going to year 3. So we're going to expand to 25. But it's fun work. You know, we have the trust of our colleagues. If we say, no, not quite, they turn right around and they fix it. You know, we have some signature events where we do a ton of content, and so it becomes really important for the ICC to be an early partner. So that could be anything from the NFL draft, the NBA draft, you know, a big film project like we did a Title IX series called 50/50. Like those things take a lot of work and a lot of thought and a lot of teamwork. And then in some cases, like I said, a story will come through and 3 of us have time to read it, you know, but we'll dive in, we'll give notes, and we'll ask questions. We also are responsible for cataloging places where we still had opportunity, where something showed up and it just wasn't quite what we wanted it to be, so that we can learn from it. But as I said, the greatest thing about what has happened is that people who are doing really important content work believe in and have come to rely on the ICC for that level of conversation, thought, feedback, that gets our work from good to great.
Excellent. I like that. And you know, I really love the collaborative nature of this. And I wanted to just take a moment to flag one of our new programs at NAMIC that really speaks to everything we're talking about. This year, we launched the Leading Inclusive Teams. And as I hear you speaking, I do know that this is an area that a lot of teams and a lot of individuals struggle with, right? What does inclusiveness really look like in its every form? And that's not something that's automatic. That's not something we're innate with, right? As a person, you know, we all bring our experiences to leadership. What I'm hearing is intentionality around inclusiveness, right? And the lens with which this committee operates. And so to anyone who's really looking at honing your skills and wondering, what is Anne-Marie talking about? I would encourage you to visit our website, take a look at the Leading Inclusive Teams program. And I think a lot of your senior managers, different directors at different levels would really benefit from what you're hearing in terms of collaboration, but really with a keen eye to inclusiveness and how that is manifested in a company culture, because that is a culture, very intentional in what she said. So I just felt like for anyone who's looking for resources, we have something that you could turn to. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact programs@namic.com. So let me jump to more of a personal side of your leadership, right? Let's talk about obstacles. I think we all have them as leaders. And so this is where I say, what, if any, obstacles have you experienced in this industry? That's just a 2-part question. I'll have the next one coming up.
Well, some I didn't see. You know, I remember leaving one newspaper and on the way out, my exit interview, seeing some of the reviews that my former boss wrote about me and not realizing that there was negative feedback that I had never heard. You know, so sometimes there are the obstacles that you do not see. But some of the obstacles that I've encountered have been one of those that I've just had to say, well, maybe I built that, you know. I'll never forget starting working at ESPN and going into the cafeteria and not really knowing anybody and realizing that, well, if I went over and sat down and talked to somebody, maybe I would get to know people faster, and literally like forcing myself to go and sit down and introduce myself. The two people who were sitting there having a conversation, and they were talking about the show Lost, and I watched Lost, and I had a whole bunch of theories. And by the time lunch was over, you know, I'd made two friends who are actually really, you know, important colleagues to me to this day. I do think, you know, one of the bigger challenges I had was I started out as I said, a cartoonist and a visual journalist, and I didn't let myself get to the point of believing that I could run the newsroom until, you know, I mean, I wasn't old, but like it was years down the line, whereas I had friends who didn't have any such hesitation. And, you know, there's no good reason why I couldn't run the newsroom. I just sort of found a safe place. You know, I think sometimes those are obstacles that we're complicit in creating, right? You know, I do think fair and honest feedback is absolutely necessary, and demanding it is also necessary. It's a difference maker. As I said, I have the job now I have now because I asked for it. I helped design it and I asked for it. You know, prior to that, it would be easy for me to kind of sit in my present role and be frustrated by the inability to affect change in a lot of other places. So I think I'm talking about a lot of obstacles that I kind of put up. And I do think some of that comes from being the other, you know, when you're not in the mainstream and you're trying to figure out your path towards being heard and seen, or really trying to figure out what the real conversation is. You know, what is the conversation people are really having that's going to move the needle? What is the problem to be solved, really? You know, and you know, I happily got to the point in my career where through great mentors and great trust with good bosses, I've been closer to those answers than farther away. But, you know, I think the way I came into the business with the advice of Alice Bonner has a lot to do with what I viewed as obstacles, right? Trying to be a cartoonist is a very hard thing. It's a very rare thing. I tried to do the hardest possible thing. And, you know, and I did it for 7 years, but like, you know, I think when I think about obstacles, what I think about really are things like, you know, as I said, incomplete feedback, you know, insecurity, you know, it's really important for anybody who's working in our business to have the confidence to stand up and show who they are rather than hide who they are, or try to fit who they are and who they think they're supposed to be. That's the path towards misery. So, you know, the degree to which energy can be driven towards authenticity, trust, sharing, and then asking for feedback or asking to know, asking for information. I mean, those things push you past a bunch of obstacles, in my view.
Oh, I really love those nuggets that you just shared, and I'm going to paraphrase them in the Anne Marie way. And what I really love is when you looked at your obstacles, I love that you started with those that you imposed on yourself, those that you created within your mind and your perception of self, right? Questioning whether you could lean in, whether, you know, those, and that manifests sometimes in where do I belong? I love that, because I think it always begins with, before we look at the mountain, ask yourself what role you have in engaging the mountain, right? And I think then you see the boulder for what it is and the mountain for what it is, right? And I love the examples you've given of leaning in, right? And making conversation. And that requires vulnerability. Let's be honest about that. So being vulnerable, but also being a self-advocate, saying the position that I have, I asked, you know, I created it. I asked for it. Lean in, know your value, know your worth, ask. I mean, the worst that can happen is no, right? But
Right.
sometimes we're even so afraid of that no, that people are just too hesitant the opportunity could be there if you really became a self-advocate, right? I guess in terms of that self-advocacy and asking, because you phrased it under asking, right? Did you have champions as you are working your way towards asking? Did you have champions, and what role did they play in helping you get the roles that you needed or wanted?
Yeah, I have had champions. This is a role that I actually saw someone hold here at ESPN for a number of years, a guy named John Walsh, and in virtually every quiet conversation we had, he was, I think, preparing me for this assignment, which was very, very helpful. And he did the assignment so well that people could actually see its value. And so that was a huge opportunity. But I've had many, many champions through the course of my career. Some of them were really instrumental in helping me see that I did have the ability to lead. When you're a graphic artist or a cartoonist, you're kind of off in the corner, but I was pulled aside by a couple of folks, a guy named Bill Reinhart and a guy named Mervyn Aubusman, and they were very clear that they believed that people would follow me if I would lead. And so they pulled me out of my visual journalism comfort zone and said, no, we're going to need you to be a boss. And I've had champions here throughout the last 18 years, left and right, in studio and in digital. Right now, I have no greater champion than Jimmy Pitaro. And, these are all folks Paul Richardson, these are all folks who, have come to rely on me, and in so doing, sort of pushed me to do more. But I think, you do need people who will see in you something that you're not even seeing in yourself from time to time, right? And you also have to feel, as I've been made to feel, that you can make big decisions about your career and expect good things to happen. Because the other thing that happens is you get to a place where you're afraid to do that, or you're hesitant to do that. Asking for this job was a big decision. It was a very big decision because it's a job of influence. And if I didn't have influence, it would probably be a very lousy job. But it is turned into something that is a point of great joy, and more importantly, it's been helpful to my colleagues. So, yeah. But I've been very, very fortunate to have people say, "Yeah, I believe that you can make a difference doing X." I've had it. I've been around a while, so I've been very fortunate.
That's outstanding. So to everybody who's listening to us today, thank you. I just want to encourage you to ask your questions as we continue to have this discussion. We'll take some time to answer any questions you may have. So please use the Q&A feature and ask questions away. And as we go through the next set of questions, we hope that you'll have a few questions for Rob. So Rob, I'm going to kind of go into more of what gives you inspiration, what gets your creative juices flowing?
Well, there are a lot of sources of inspiration. My father still writes for the Washington Post every week. His name is Colbert King, won the Pulitzer in 2003. He's in his 80s, but he's still banging away. That is incredibly inspiring. My son just is in his 6th week as a freshman at Temple University and is majoring in journalism and communication. So that is very, very inspiring. But I'm inspired by my colleagues. Every day I see something on television or I read something where I just think, these people they're the best there is, and they care deeply about giving folks the joy of sports. I find that as a journalist, it's inspiring because, I always say this, when sports journalists say this all the time, we have election night every night, right? Every night. And we can't call the race early. And, and we don't get free pizza when we make deadline. It's a different animal, in order to do what our team did last night with 2 separate broadcasts and You know, I mean, it's like a fortress of great, smart people working really, really hard. So that does get my creative juices flowing. But the other thing that does get my creative juices flowing is when I do a lot of reading, and when I just, I read a piece of fiction and it just sort of sings to me, it gets me going as well. But not much gives me more joy than the colleagues that I have, because this is a special place.
I love that. So what book are you currently reading?
Oh, so there is this really long series called The Expanse, and I'm reading the final book in the Expanse series. And when I say reading, I'm also listening to it on an audiobook. To let you know how long this book is, the audiobook is 19 hours and 42 minutes. And I still have like 2.5 hours to go. And I would love very much to get to this other book that I picked up, but I got to get through this thing first. Because it's a series. I got to get to the end of the series.
Right. No cheating, right?
Right.
And interesting. Do you have a favorite book on leadership and mentorship that you recommend to our audience?
Yeah, so Jesse John Washington wrote an autobiography of John Thompson, which is, it's an amazing book. And it feels to me like it's not your straightforward leadership book. Like I could sort of toe the party line and tell you that I also really like Bob Iger's book, but the John Thompson book, just by virtue of how he created the program and what he was willing to do to create the program in DC, to me is one of my favorite reads of the last 5 years for sure.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So my next question, again, these kind of like the fun stuff. What are the top 3 songs on your current playlist?
Chant a Psalm by Steel Pulse. I'm trying to think, because I'm gonna cheat and look. Chant a Psalm and Le Fleur by Four Hero and Karina Anderson, and then You Did by Chuck Prophet. It's pretty crazy.
Pretty cool. Wow. Yeah. Interesting taste. I love it. Oh, somebody just asked, what was your favorite cartoon that you drew?
My favorite cartoon that I drew. Let's see here. So I did win an editorial cartooning award for a comic strip during the war with Iraq, where a soldier had dragged himself across the field to stand at the feet of Saddam Hussein, and the soldier was saying, "Well, you're right about one thing, that battle was a mother." And so that won an award. I've done a lot of them. From the standpoint of the comic strip, the fun ones were always like Sundays, where you can do more panels. And then this one character decides that he doesn't like this whole notion of so many colors on basketball sneakers. Like, all he wants is just a pure, just some white shoes. So he goes into the store and he says, "Listen, all I want is some white shoes." And then the next thing you know, he's walking back on the basketball court and he's wearing Bucks. So, now these are easier to see than tell, but I had a lot of fun over the course of those years.
That's pretty awesome. Thank you. And that was a really good question, everybody. Can you believe it's been almost an hour since we started this conversation? Rob, it's been such a pleasure, and I would be remiss if I didn't really say thank you to ESPN for allowing us, also say SP Awards, for allowing us to have this conversation with you, and to Jim Pataro for being the honorary chair of our annual conference, which happened about a week ago. Thank you for the great insights and nuggets, and congratulations again on the amazing work you're doing. And that video is one that I think I will always reflect on. And I hope that once my career is where yours is, that people would describe me the way they described you in terms of your leadership, your empathy, your consciousness, and your being the voice of DEI at ESPN. Congratulations, great work. And thank you so much for spending this hour with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
All right, that concludes our webinar for today. I want to invite everybody who's a new member to join us in about a week's time, where we'll be having a new member welcome. And until the next series, thank you and have a wonderful evening. Thank you, Rob. What a
Bye-bye.
pleasure. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.